about his idea to have a congressional debate. I encouraged David to reach out to the respective campaigns, and since that day, here we are with this congressional debate. We're grateful to Congressman Reed, Mr. Shinagawa, for accepting HWS Vote's invitation to join us here, and I thank David on behalf of HWS Votes with his co-president, Olivia Lowenberg, who have also worked with our students on an important civic engagement activity here and registering our students. In our first-year class coming into the colleges, they came from 31 states. So registering to vote, securing absentee ballots is very difficult, far away from home. Thanks to the student leadership of HWS Votes, more than 800 Hobart and William Smith students have registered through their initiative to obtain a ballot and to vote through this effort called 2-Row Vote. This partnership was so overwhelming. In fact, we were the very first school of the partnered schools nationwide to reach 25% of our student body. And today, we're first in enrollment with 35% of our student body has registered through this initiative of Turbo Vote. And we're thankful to David and Olivia and HWS Votes for their role in tonight's debate. Thank you, David and Olivia. I'm privileged to introduce the moderator of tonight's debate, Professor of Political Science, Iva Deutchman. Professor Deutchman, welcome, and thank you. Both campaigns have agreed to follow the decorum requested of HWS Votes, and that is to follow the protocols of the past presidential and vice presidential debates. And that is, we ask the audience, you've heard it all, to withhold your applause throughout the debate so we can maximize the time for questions and answers. With the exception of right now, when we welcome Congressman Tom Reed and Tompkins County Legislator Nate Shinagawa.
Thank you, President Guerin, and good evening, gentlemen. I am joined at this table by two students from the colleges, David Luna, who Mark mentioned, he's a junior from New York City, and Jacqueline Paolino, who is a junior from Providence, Rhode Island. And David and Jackie will be our official timekeepers for this evening. The questions for tonight's debate have been submitted by students and faculty from Hobart and William Smith and selected from a bipartisan panel and approved by me. And you, candidates, have been provided with a list of the broad topics to be covered, but have not received the questions in advance. So, our rules that we're going to follow tonight have been previously agreed to by your campaigns, and I reiterate them for you and for the audience. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Then, following each question, you will have 3 minutes to respond, and the opposing candidate will have up to 2 minutes for a rebuttal, okay? At my discretion, I will allow up to 30 seconds for additional finishing a sentence or whatever. And finally, to end the evening, you will have closing statements at 2 minutes each, okay? With 30 seconds remaining in your answer, our timekeepers will hold up a yellow sign, okay? And we will ring a bell when your time has
Thank you.
expired or the pizza has been delivered.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, with that, we will begin. A coin toss determined the order of the question, and Mr. Shinagawa, you won the coin toss,
Yes.
and we'll go first.
All right.
Okay, so the first question is from Kelsey Walls, who's a Hobart student, senior.
Well, Iva, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think opening statements?
Oh,
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
you were good. Okay.
All right.
Opening statements.
Well, I'd like to begin by thanking you all for being here today. I'd like to thank David Luna for organizing this event. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you, David. And also thank Professor Deutchman for moderating. And I'd also like to thank the Facilities Department of Hobart and William Smith Colleges because they found a podium that makes President Guerin and I look pretty tall. So thank you. Now, whoever becomes President of the United States is going to have to work with a Congress that's going to be focused on actually pushing through a jobs agenda to actually turn around this economy and get things done again. And tonight you're going to hear my opponent call me something like a tax and spend liberal. And that is not my record at all. In 2008, I was the budget chairman of Tompkins County, where I found a bipartisan way for us to get things done, work together, and actually pass a budget that was on time and reduce taxes by 13.7%. In addition to that, I'm a hospital administrator, and I have over 200 employees, a budget of about $10 million. And whenever I do my budgets, I always find ways to take a balanced approach, one that looks at making things more efficient, cutting costs, but at the same time ways to find revenues so that we can invest in our future. And I want to have that same approach in Washington. You know, let me tell you, my family, my grandfather served in both the Korean and Vietnam Wars. And when he returned to the United States after those wars, he was able to get a job in manufacturing. And that job was able to pay the bills and provide opportunities for our young people. Unfortunately, today, we look at this economy and we see that Congressman Reed, instead of wanting to help out the middle class, he proposes policies that would privatize Social Security, actually incentivize jobs going overseas. And I don't think that it's the right course of action for our future. And I think that we need to invest in our middle class and actually help out our senior citizens and actually push this economy towards actually being more fair for all. Thank you.
Congressman.
Well, thank you very much, Iva. Thank you to each and every one of you for coming out tonight to participate in this great conversation that we will have over the next hour. I would like to thank Hobart and William Smith Colleges for hosting us and putting this together. I would also like to recognize my wife, Jean, and my son, Will, who are sitting in the front row. We're right there. But my daughter is not able to attend tonight because she's cheerleading. And they're in the sectional playoffs at Corning and Elmira are playing as we speak. But tonight, we're going to have a great conversation about the future of America. And rather than engage in petty politics, name-calling, pointing out different things about each other, what I'm really going to try to focus on is what is the vision of America moving forward. And that vision needs to include a strong and vibrant private sector. We need to get people back to work. Bottom line. This campaign, this election cycle, is about jobs. And it's about jobs that I believe need to be championed in the private sector. There will be a contrast. There will be a difference between myself and my opponent. I believe my opponent will advocate for bigger government, for more spending, and for a strong public sector to lead us out of this economic turmoil. I believe differently. I believe in individuals. I believe in the private sector. And that is the vision that I carried with me when I ran for Congress back in November 2010 for the first time. When I went to Congress, I was so concerned about that national debt, that $16 trillion that is growing at the rate of $1.1 trillion every year. That's $55,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. We can do better. We need to do better. Because if we don't tackle that debt, if we don't get people working, if we don't grow this economy, then we're never going to get out of this hole, and we're never going to have that prosperous America that we can hand off to our children and make sure that they have an opportunity to succeed, as many of us have. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first question is from Kelsey Walls, who's a Hobart senior, and it goes to Congressman Reed. And the question is, the Finger Lakes contain some of the cleanest drinking water in the country. If you are elected, what will you do to protect this important resource?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Let me just say, I live in a house my grandpa built in 1922 in Corning, New York. We have been in this area all of our lives. We have the family cottage now that my grandpa bought on Cuca Lake back in 1944. It's the same cottage that I grew up on. It's the same lake that my son swims in, the same lake that he fishes for rock bass and sunfish off the end of our dock, just like I did when I was a kid as he sits there with Tootsie, our chocolate lab. And I'll tell you, we're not going to do anything to hurt this area. We are no longer in an era where they have orange skies and orange water. That is a colleague of mine, Mark Kretz, a Democrat who co-chaired the Marcellus Shale Caucus with us in Washington, D.C. He came from the southern part of Pennsylvania, coal country. And he said, we no longer are going to live in a society where orange skies and orange water are acceptable. And that's true today. And that's good. So I believe in strong environmental oversight, but I truly do believe in allowing the local governments, the state governments, because I do believe that the governments closest to the people are the ones that govern best, and that a one-size-fits-all policy out of Washington, D.C. is not the best policy for us here in upstate New York. We need to give the flexibility. We need to make sure that it's done in a safe and responsible manner, whatever that activity may be, and we'll make sure that that is done through appropriate oversight and reasonable oversight, because as I've talked to so many small business owners, Iva, one of the things they're concerned about is the agenda coming out of Washington, D.C., the overreach and regulatory burdens, that are causing them to ask the question, how am I going to hire the next person? And when this is about jobs, we need to make sure that we're championing the private sector, that we're taking that burden off the backs of those small business innovators, entrepreneurs, and allow them to hire the jobs of today and tomorrow.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mr. Shinagawa?
Yes, thank you, Professor. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson once said that you need to go put your creed into your deed. And the congressman says that he supports actually clean air and clean water. However, the congressman has voted against regulating fracking in the Finger Lakes, against regulating it in the Great Lakes as well. He won't even support a bill like the Frack Act, which would actually allow fracking to be regulated by the EPA and actually force these companies to disclose the chemicals they use in this process. What I believe is that we need to have a policy where we will make sure that fracking, at least at the federal level, is regulated fully under the EPA, and that we do not allow fracking to come into New York State and places like the Finger Lakes. Now, the issue of fracking, though, is not an environmental issue. It's a jobs issue. And the problem with fracking is that it creates short-term jobs that will not be there for the long and run. And we've looked at places like Wyoming or Texas or Oklahoma, and you see a boom and a bust cycle. All you have to do is look at these 1,200 jobs that the congressman will probably be talking about, and look at where those jobs are from. The sand companies, the drilling specialists, the drilling fluid specialists. These are jobs that are only going to last for a few years, and what will be left is us, as the taxpayers, footing the cost for this. That is not the right future. What we need to do is invest in what we're good at here in New York State and here in the Southern Tier. Actually invest in our manufacturing, build things here in America again, and actually focus on renewable energy technology. What we've got to look at is our agriculture industry. Pass things like the Farm Bill that the congressman has actually let lapse in the House of Representatives. And that we also promote our tourism industry here, which has turned around the economies of the Finger Lakes. And by the way, if we bring fracking here, we put a direct threat into both the agriculture and tourism industries here in New York State, and that is not something that we should allow. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shinagawa, we're going to stay with you for this next question. Submitted by Hobart student Andrew Mason from the class of 2014. And he would like to know what your thoughts are on Mr. Obama's policies in the Middle East, particularly in regards to Libya and Syria. And he asks, do you feel the situation as a whole is more settled now, or any more settled now than it was 4 years ago?
Yes, Professor Deutchman, this is a very serious issue, what we do with our policies in the Middle East. And I think that it's very hard to talk about it in 3 minutes. But what we can do is I will start by talking about Libya and then Syria, and also places like Iran. Now, with Libya, I think that that is an example of how we can actually intervene in a conflict to actually help citizens and overthrow a dictatorship. Unfortunately, the congressman voted against actually us taking that action in Libya. Now, with Syria, I believe that we need to stop the Assad regime any way that we can, and that means especially, any way that we can without the use of force, right? And that especially means that we need to actually talk to Russia and China and say that they cannot continue their relationship with the Assad regime because they're killing their own citizens. We also need to look at the opposition and say, who in the opposition can we actually work with? And I'm not convinced that giving heavy weaponry to some of the opposition is a good idea, because there's no guarantee they won't use that against us in the future. Now, with Iran, I support the president's efforts of having some of the strictest sanctions in the world. And that has actually put pressure on the Iranian regime there. In fact, actually, when the president of Iran was in New York City, his staff was actually spotted buying shampoo at convenience stores in bulk numbers, because their economy has been completely changed by these sanctions. There is economic pressure being put on the regime, and I think then we'll actually get them to realize that a nuclear program is not part of their future. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman.
Yeah, and it's always Tom, Nate. You can always call me Tom.
Yes.
Not a problem. There's a real problem here. Mr. Shinagawa is correct.
You can call me Nate as well.
Okay. See, I waited for you to let me to do that. Now I'll call you Nate from on on. Now I feel more comfortable.
Thank you.
What Nate has pointed out is something that is very important. And this is why we voted, that's why I voted against our involvement in Libya. Because what I saw when the president made that decision was there was no clear policy as to why that decision was made. Where was the consistency? Where was the reason behind us going into Libya? And what I heard was that there was millions or thousands of citizens at risk, citizens of Libya being killed, there was genocide, there were evil things occurring within Libya. Now fast forward. Syria. You got 30,000 Syrians dead. And what do you think it is on the grounds of Syria that they're saying to each other? Where's America? They went in Libya. Thousands of the Libyans died, but they're not coming here to protect us. What kind of message does that project around the world? And what we need most in our foreign policy is consistency. We need consistency, and when we make a decision to engage our men and women or use our equipment, use our resources, be them financial or be them weapons, that we do it in a consistent manner. And that when we deal with our allies and our friends around the world, they know where America stands. And also, when it comes to Iran and others, we need to send a signal of strength. Because I will tell you, we have been briefed many a times. We met with Sharon Peres. I met with Benjamin Netanyahu. And I will tell you, on the ground, they are concerned. And they are telling me, and they are telling many others, that what the projection coming out of America now is inconsistency and weakness. And I will tell you, that is a dangerous combination when you're dealing with radical communities and societies like Iran, because they will make decisions where they think, well, will America act? They need to know America will act.
Thank you, Congressman. And we're gonna...
If I may just add a quick rebuttal
Yes.
there, is that what the congressman seems to be talking about is this kind of saber rattling that I believe is causing many of the problems that we have with our high oil prices right now, and also is adding to the inconsistency that we have with our foreign policy. When we have one side, the Republican leadership, doing this saber rattling, talking about force, when that's not the course of action that we should be having. Now, with Libya, Libya is a very different country than Syria. It's a much smaller country. And what we did is we took the right course of action by coming in at the right time to save those Libyans and actually turning around the government. If we go with the direction of actually pushing in Syria, that could lead to another conflict in the Middle East, which would not be good for any of us here.
Congressman, we'll switch topics again. And this question comes from Jay Gramellini, who is a Hobart senior. And he would like you to tell him, do you think that it is within the government's responsibility to reduce gasoline prices, and why?
I think there is a role of government in the sense of making sure that our marketplace is certain and that we develop a comprehensive energy policy and all of the above that will give that stability and certainty of saying to Americans that, you know what, we got a plan. We got a plan that is going to lessen our dependency on foreign oil in particular, especially that oil that comes from Middle Eastern states, which are no friends of ours, which, as Nate points out, come from an area of the world that is very destable. And I'll tell you, when you have foreign policy that's determined because of the geographical size of a country, come on, we got to do better than that. Essentially what I'm hearing with that comment is, if it's easy, we'll go. But if it's hard, don't rely on us. The bottom line, what we need to do when it comes to gasoline prices, is make sure we have the good, long-term, stable supply chains coming into America. And what that means is we need to rely on our domestic sources of energy and fossil fuels. Because I think that's one of the best things that we can do, is because if you increase that supply and you have it come from domestic sources, which are very stable, you will create a marketplace that is not as volatile, which is causing these price spikes that we're seeing at the pump. The other thing that's very concerning, and we jumped on this a few weeks ago, is what the Federal Reserve is doing. And we made a very strong point about this. They are pumping cash out into our economy at ungodly rates. And what is that doing? That is weakening our dollar. And what is that doing? Well, the price of crude, barrels of oil, upon which the price lien at the gas pump is set, is based on the settlement cost of what that barrel of oil costs. And as the dollar weakens, those prices go up. And as the prices go up, that's what gets reflected at the price pump. And I'll tell you, I've talked to so many families. I mean, we've done 75-plus town halls going around the district, and they're hurting. I get that. I talk to my wife. I talk around our kitchen table. When you see food costs going up because of all the fuel costs that are reflected in those costs that are at the grocery store as well as at the pump, I get it. And so we need to make sure that we don't forget the opportunities that we have right here in America in those domestic supplies of oil and natural gas that would do so much to get us off that dependency of foreign oil. Because also, one last point on natural gas. If natural gas, which is projected to show, regardless of it happens in New York or not, is we're looking at about 100 and 150-year supply of natural gas. That is potentially, the technology is there to deploy it in the transportational fuel sector. And if that becomes a transportational fuel, just our long-haul tractor trailers, report I read that came across my desk, if we retrofit our long-haul tractor trailers, you're going to be talking about 9 million barrels less of oil a day being imported into America from foreign sources. We got to get off foreign oil.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Shinagawa?
Yes, thank you. Well, obviously, I believe that reducing gas prices is a part of what the federal government should be involved in doing. Now, when it comes to gas prices, I'm very familiar with this issue because I've put over 50,000 miles on our campaign car going across this very big district. But I've got to say, though, that the congressman, if he truly cared about gas prices in this country, he would have actually signed on to a bill that would have said that any of the energy that we extract from natural gas or oil here in the United States, especially used with federally leased land, that we would actually keep that for actual domestic use. Unfortunately, the congressman has decided to put that out into the world markets. The congressman is also in the issue of natural gas, trying to actually make it so that we can liquefy it and also sell it around the world, which is not going to help our domestic energy crisis. All it will do is make the corporations, the oil and gas companies that already give him over $70,000 a year, it will only make them more profitable. Now, what I believe we need to do is that we need to continue with our conservation standards. Now look at what we've done with the auto industry, saying that they need to have higher miles per gallon. And now just look, I saw a billboard on Geneva on my way over here, a Ford Fusion with 37 miles per gallon. All right, that's an American car with 37 miles per gallon. And that has happened because we've actually said at the federal level that that is a priority. What we also need to do is that we need to say if we are developing energy domestically, that energy should be used here in the United States to lower prices. And then finally, what we need to do is we need to look at our renewable energy sector. Because all of these, whether it's oil or gas, these are all short-term ideas. And that's the problem in Washington right now, is that we have plenty of short-term ideas. But what about the long-term ideas that are going to turn around this economy? And one of those long-term ideas is investing in renewable energy, wind, solar, and biomass, which is, by the way, a growth sector, which will create jobs at a very high rate that we can do right here in the Southern Tier and Finger Lakes of New York.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Shinagawa, we're going to stay with you for a question from William Smith Sr., Marta Petrovich, and she says, Seneca Lake is one of the best attractions this area has. Waste disposal and the possibility of fracking threaten the lake both ecologically and economically. How will you protect the lake?
Absolutely. Now, I've got to say that my personal issue with the Finger Lakes actually comes from my work with State Assemblywoman Barbara Lifton. Now, there was a truck traffic regulations a number of years ago to help protect communities that were being affected by the high number of trash trucks that were coming from New York City to go to the Seneca Meadows landfill. And those trash trucks could have used the thruway, for example, instead of going through our communities. Now, that was for just trash trucks. That came at a very frequent, but not terribly infrequent rate compared to what would happen if we industrialized the Finger Lakes by allowing natural gas to come into this area. And so I believe that, you know, in terms of preserving the Finger Lakes, one of the key things that we could do is say that we will not allow in the Finger Lakes fracking to come to this area, because it will devastate the agriculture and tourism industries which have turned these economies around. Mm-hmm. Now, also for the lakes, I've at the local level have worked to fight invasive species that are affecting the lakes. And now I'm going to talk about a plant called hydrilla. It is not related to Godzilla, but it is a plant that is very devastating. It grows at a very high rate, and it has the chance of actually stopping all the waterways, the marinas, the docks, clogging up all these engines with these plants. It would actually mean the end of a lot of the boating tourism that we have in the Finger Lakes region. We've got to fight that invasive species, but we've also got to fight and make sure it doesn't go out to the Great Lakes, where it would have an even greater impact. The problem right now is that at the local level, we're the ones that are forced to deal with the problem. And we're spending millions of dollars at the property tax level in order to fight this invasive species. I believe that there is a federal role in helping out these communities so that we don't have to have that shift to property taxes.
Thank you very much. Congressman?
Well, I will say that the position you just outlined, Nate, is completely just telling the crowd what they want to hear. Because
it's their own communities.
Because, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, let us just be careful. Let's just be careful. Because it is elected officials like Mr. Shinagawa that are just going to stand in front of crowds and tell them exactly what they feel. His position on hydrofracking is hell, never, never in my backyard. You got up in the primary and you said 1,000 times, we're never going to have it. Well, this is why my position, I think, makes sense. The government closest to the people governs best. Let's let local governments, let's let the states. We've supported, we are not opposed in the final regulations coming out from New York State, exempting out the Finger Lakes watershed. Seems to make sense to me. Because you know why? Because when you really study the issue, we have to look at the unique characteristics of the Finger Lakes. And the thing that causes me concern most about the Finger Lakes is that what we have is a potential disruption of the tourism industry and our local activities with the traffic that's coming through the Finger Lakes. That is something that could be best regulated on the state level. So why not just take a reasonable approach, like we take, and say, you know what, we don't need duplicate oversight. We don't need multiple layers of federal government, state government, local government. Let the local and state governments make those decisions that are within their parameters and say, let's exempt the Finger Lakes out. That makes sense to me. And that way you have the ability to develop natural gas across the country. And you know what? The ironic thing is, this is something I agree with President Obama on. President Obama supports natural gas development. He sees the opportunity that's associated with it, not only the jobs that is associated with getting the gas out of the ground, but you're missing the point, Nate. Long term, natural gas represents a source of power for our manufacturers that result in low-cost utility rates that allow them to make the investments. So when they're choosing between building a plant on the world economy in China or Malaysia or India or Laos, where they're looking now, they can say, you know what? Those cheap utility rates allow me to be competitive on the world market by making those investments here in America. And that's what we have to do. Rather than putting up protectionism and protective walls at our border, what we need to do is make a strong, private sector, competitive American market. And you do that by tackling this debt. You do that by reducing the burdensome on our small businesses when it comes to the regulations coming out of Washington. You do that with comprehensive tax reform to make our code competitive on the world stage. And you do that with a comprehensive energy policy, which includes hydraulic fracturing as part of our energy policy and natural gas development to produce those utility rates that are going to put people to work for generations.
If I may have a quick rebuttal. Now, what you're hearing from the congressman is what you'll hear the rest of tonight. You'll hear him talking about policies that are going to benefit the biggest corporations, many of them who don't even employ folks here. And then he's going to forget about these communities, our small businesses that are going to be affected by the decisions he makes. And I have had winery owners. I mean, just in the Corning Leader the other day, there was an article about how the winery owners have come together and said that fracking can't be part of their future because it directly threatens their small businesses. I've talked to cattle farmers in places like Candor who have told me that if fracking comes in, they're not sure about the long-term financing of their farms because already in places like Pennsylvania, once there's a gas drill even nearby one of the farms, not even on their farms, nearby, they can't refinance. And so these questions, I think, are very important, and we need to recognize that I will be somebody that will be fighting for small businesses locally, communities locally, not for a multinational corporation that is, for example, in the case of Congressman Reed, giving $70,000 to affect his opinion.
Congressman, do you want to respond?
Thank you very much. I mean, that's ridiculous. I live here. I live in a house my grandpa built in 1922. I'm never moving from here. The next time I move, they're going to have to carry me away in a box. Now, I'm hoping it's going to be a little smaller than what's going to take to carry me now. But I'll tell you, this is my home. We're not going to do anything to hurt it. And I think what you just said, Nate, is that you just backed off your position on hydraulic fracturing by saying, okay, let's take it and make it exempt for the purposes of the Finger Lakes. But you're suggesting that it's okay to do it as part of the national energy policy. And what you're doing is you're not being consistent. Just be honest with people. With me, I'm always going to be open and honest with you. And I'm just going to tell you exactly how we feel.
Please.
And that is... And that's because that's how we were raised here. I'm the youngest of 12 kids. I got a dad who was 20 years in the military that taught us in our family that's how you treat people. You treat people with respect. You treat people, you tell them how you feel, and you really have a conversation with them. And that's what we've done. Our record over the last 2 years, we've done 75 town halls, not because we're trying to get to a target, but that's what a representative does, and that's what we're going to continue to do as we move forward.
Okay, can we move on to the next question, which goes first to Congressman Reed and comes from my colleague in the Political Science Department, Professor Kevin Dunn. And he says, Geneva's economic revitalization has been led by grassroots entrepreneurs. What specific policies would you champion to further sustainable development here and elsewhere in the Finger Lakes region?
I would support those policies, those 4 points that I articulated, and that we have made part of our mission as we've gone to Washington, D.C. And that's to create a competitive private sector in America again. You got to tackle this debt because it's causing so much uncertainty. The $16 trillion, and it's all because of a spending problem in Washington, D.C. We need to get it under control. Second point, We have to take care of these regulations that are coming out of Washington, D.C. Take, for example, the TMDL standards, the nitrates and phosphates for the Chesapeake Bay initiatives that we have been fighting tooth and nail to push back on. Now, my opponent, Mr. Shinagawa, Nate, has supported those TMDL standards. He voted for that in the Tompkins County Legislature. What's that going to do? That's going to destroy our farmers. That is going to destroy our municipalities' wastewater treatment facilities and have to enforce them to come up with the cash to retrofit those facilities. That's going to cost millions. Those are taxpayer dollars. So that's a burden on that small business up here in Geneva that they're going to have to pick up in order to comply with these TMDL standards that they can't even measure. They make no sense. You know, we're all for clean water, but you got to have a reasonable standard when it comes to these things, and that's what we believe in, and that's what we've been deploying for 2 years and in our entire life as we go forward. And the next point is we have to make sure that our tax code is reformed. We need comprehensive tax reform. Because I have talked to so many people right up here in Geneva as we've gone on the campaign trail, and I'll tell you, Nate, you put 50,000 miles on the car. We put 75,000 on the last time, and we got the same Buick, and boy, I'll tell you, she's really wounded because she barely got here tonight. But the bottom line is that what we need to do is we got to reform that tax code because these guys are telling me, as we go out and talk, I don't even know what my tax bill is going to be next year. The rates are expiring at the end of the year with this fiscal cliff. That uncertainty has to end. And that's why we've been a strong proponent of comprehensive tax reform, so people understand what the rules are. And one of the key things that I bring to the table when we go through comprehensive tax reform, and my colleagues on the Ways and Means Committee know this, is that I want to stand for permanency. No more 10-year tax codes, no more 2-year tax codes. We need permanent tax policy that makes sense. We need to simplify the code and bring certainty to the marketplace. And the last point is that comprehensive energy policy that will lead to direct jobs related with getting that resource out of the ground, but also the long-term power that represents both in our area and across the country. That changes the dynamic. That creates a vibrant private sector upon which jobs can be grown in the manufacturing sector in particular for generations to come.
Thank you. Mr. Shinagawa.
Now, Professor Deutchman, the question was specifically about sustainable quality jobs here in
Yes.
Geneva and in other communities in the Finger Lakes, correct?
Yes.
Now, what the Congressman has just talked about is developing a business climate that only benefits the biggest corporations, many of them who are already getting incentives, and even more incentives that the Congressman has voted for, by the way, to ship jobs overseas. What we need is, instead of having somebody that's going to be fighting for a climate for big business, we need a champion of small business and local communities right now. And I've done that already. I am a member of the Industrial Development Agency of Tompkins County and the Community Development Corporation of Tompkins County. And we've helped to bring in over $56 million of new investment into the local economy. And how do we do that? Well, we offer things like low-interest financing to help out our small businesses. When they needed a little help with actually expanding their businesses, we gave them some of the guarantees that they needed so that they could get a loan. All right? We made sure that there were standards so that they were paying good wages for folks. And those actual investments have paid off in things like the Ithaca Beer Company, growing from a small little place to now having a full facility where they're even growing their hops in their backyard. We've invested in Cortland Produce Company. That's provided great jobs for folks in the local region. So what do we need to do to support our small businesses is that we actually need to invest in making sure that they can get those low-interest loans, that we push for the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act actually gives them a 50% tax credit next year that covers their cost of health insurance. It actually creates a health care exchange that says that, before we knew as a small business, you can only get health insurance on your own, and it was costly. But now under the health insurance exchanges, you're now able to buy health insurance as part of a larger group, and that's going to save you money. That's a key part of the reforms that we need to have. We also need to invest in education. Whether you're opening up a restaurant or you have a manufacturing company with 50 employees, the cost of educating yourself and your employees is very, very high. And so that's why there is a government role to make sure that actually community colleges and technical schools and four-year degrees are affordable. Unfortunately, the Congressman doesn't agree with that and has voted to double student loan rates and reduce 9 million Pell Grants. But we've got to make education affordable to help out our small businesses and help out our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will...
If I could have a 30-second rebuttal on that. Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, what I just heard is definitely a contrast between myself and my opponent. What my opponent said is, let me on the Economic Development Board, the IDA, pick the winners and losers. Let me decide which business can prosper and which one can't, which one is going to get the benefits and which one are not. Now, I've been associated, I was a mayor, and I worked with a lot of the economic development companies, and we put together packages, and you know what we did? We always had the conversation, we were talking with manufacturers in particular. There are 3 points: insurance, taxes, and utilities. And you lower those taxes and utility costs, that's what the package is all about. And I want to do that for everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Shinagawa,
Yes.
we'll stay with you. This is a question from Lauren Rossman, who is a William Smith Senior. And she says, why do you think Congress's approval rating is at a historic low? And what type of changes need to be made to fix that?
Yes. Well, I think that Congress's approval rating is so low because they haven't been able to get much done to turn around this economy and actually make it so that we have jobs in America again. You know, and all you have to do is look at this Congress right now. You know, they've worked less than 100 days. By the way, a congressperson gets paid $175,000 a year. How many people work 100 days and get paid $175,000 in this room? All right. You know, in addition, this has been a Congress that has been very ineffective in actually passing legislation. And the congressman tonight will speak about how bipartisan he is. But in terms of actual legislation he's passed, right, he hasn't passed any that has actually become law. Right? And that is a measure of how much work our congressperson does. Because, by the way, a law isn't just adding new laws, it's also reducing some laws too. Right? So it means that that's actually that they're taking action. I think the problem that exists right now in Washington is that people go into Washington and they see each other as enemies rather than colleagues. So one of the things that I believe we need to do is look at what other countries do instead of where they push campaigns out. Say that you can only campaign during a certain time period, raise money during a certain time period, and that will actually make it so that we stay in governance mode rather than fighting and campaign mode. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congressman?
Yeah, I am proud of our bipartisan record in the last 2 years.
Stop. Okay.
And I'll tell you, and I don't know why everybody's laughing, but the USA Today was the one who recognized that, and I'll tell you, guys, Nate, did you pack them? How much you paid these guys to be here tonight?
Let's be respectful, yes.
But let's look at the record.
Yeah.
Just look at the record. That's all. Just look at the record. USA Today, recognized us as a bipartisan leader in Washington, D.C. We have worked together as part of many coalitions, the Go Big coalition that we joined in the beginning. And I'm proud to say over the last 2 years, that coalition is getting bigger and bigger. It's a bipartisan group of members that get together on a regular basis, and we have a lot of good conversation. And Nate, you try to say that you're different and that you're going to be this bipartisan person that comes together. But right here, on May 29, 2012, you stated, I am tired of Democrats who are only with us 70% of the time, 80% of the time. I want Democrats who are 100% with us. That type of statement is partisanship. And that's got to end. And I'll tell you, I'll put our reputation up against anybody. Because down in Washington, we have been recognized by our colleagues and our peers, guys like Steny Hoyers, guys like Heath Schuler, guys that we talk with on a regular basis, Mark Kritz, who we started and co-founded the Marcellus Shale Caucus with, who's a Democrat from Pennsylvania, as a guy who is willing to really roll up his sleeves and have those conversations. I'll remember it vividly. One of the first times on the floor of the House, we were voting real late. It was about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I will say, there was this older member who was having this problem with this piece of legislation, had to deal with banking regulations. And it was a Democrat on the other side of the aisle that was fighting him. And I'm like, well, why don't we go over and talk to him? And a guy said, on the Republican side, who'd been there many years, who said, I'm not going to go talk to that SOB because 30 years ago he did blah, blah, blah. I was like, 30 years ago, I was like a kid. I mean, I'll go over and talk to him. So I went over and talked to him, started a relationship. And that's what we're all about. So I agree that there needs to be a change in culture and tone in Washington, D.C. And that's why I'm proud to be part of this freshman class. Because this freshman class, to a T, went to Washington, D.C. to do something. not worry about getting reelected. And I have heard time and time again that people in Washington go, we don't know how to deal with you guys, you freshman class. Because it used to be we were able to give you something and say, support this, we'll put you on the front page of the paper and get you reelected, and therefore everything's hunky-dory, and everyone said, yeah, sign me up, I'm there. We don't do that. We go, why are we doing this? What is this doing to the debt? How is this going to get people back to work? How is this going to create jobs? That's the conversation we have. And you're absolutely right. The impression of Congress, it's frustrating. Frustrating in Washington, D.C. to see that bickering and that not that give and take that we so need. That's why I look to people like Mahone who have endorsed us, and I counsel with him at least once or twice a month to be that statesman down in Washington.
If I may point out a few facts here. Now, the congressman has voted with the Republican Party 93% of the time. I don't think that makes him a very bipartisan person. He has been he identifies himself as a Tea Party person, is going to a Tea Party event in 4 days. Everyone in this room knows, whether you're Republican or you're Democrat, that the Tea Party has said that their top agenda is obstructing the president. Obstructing the president. Not getting things done, but obstructing the president. And the congressman identifies himself with that group. The one real piece of bipartisanship that the congressman could talk about, that Tom could talk about, is Cooper-LaTourette. And Cooper-LaTourette actually would increase taxes on middle-class families. And even more than that, it actually has even more draconian cuts, bigger cuts than the Ryan plan does. So, when it comes to bipartisanship, right, well, there's bipartisanship in name, but if bipartisanship means actually putting our seniors to have higher costs, and also hurting small businesses and actually raising taxes on middle-class families, I will not stand for that type of bipartisanship.
Congressman Reed, the next question comes from Jake Dietrich from the Hobart class of 2014, and he asks, how has redistricting affected the way you have campaigned?
Redistricting in regards to the campaign, we have gotten on the campaign just like we did when we first ran back in 2009. We get out, we travel around. I come home every weekend to be with my family for a brief moment. When we get home at Friday night, I'm back out there Saturday morning doing town halls and going out and talking to people and having conversations and really listening to people. And we've done that on the campaign. It hasn't changed. That's because that's what I believe in. I believe in that work ethic. I believe in getting out there and really talking and listening to people. And now, Nate, you referenced the Tea Party, and you're trying to portray yourself as this bipartisan, bring people together. There are Tea Party people in our district, a lot of them, that you need to talk with, that you need to sit with, that you need to have a conversation with, just like I sat down with people of the Progressive Caucus, just like I've sat down with university professors at Cornell University, which are not too conservative people. They're a little bit the other side. And we've had some great conversations. And we do that all the time. So when it comes to campaigning, we just get out there and we try to do the work so that we truly understand what people are talking about. And you know what they're talking about? They're talking about jobs. And how are we going to create jobs for generations to come? Now, we can have government-driven policies like my opponent is trying to support and advocate for, or we're going to create a vibrant private sector economy in America again. I want to build things in America again. Now, you say that we support policies that send jobs overseas. That's just hogwash. That's not true. That's just not true. Bottom line is what we support are strong pro-growth policies that when people are making the decisions, they know what the rules are. We bring certainty to those investment protocols, and that people are making the decision because it's the most competitive that they can place their business in here in America. Those are the policies I want to advocate for and continue to be a voice for. And we'll continue to campaign. Now, we've been over to Ithaca, we've been over to Chautauqua, we've been to Ripley, we've been over to Waterloo, we've been to Geneva, we've been knocking on doors here, we've been in parades. We've had fun in parades, you and I.
Yes.
I mean, we got wet a few times in parades, throwing candy and things like that. And see, that's what's okay. I mean, we are passionate about our different positions, but we can get along and we can talk to each other, and you have a lot to offer, and I appreciate that. And so the bottom line is we're going to just keep doing it. I enjoy it. It's me. I love sitting in people's living room, having a cup of coffee. I have learned so much from conversations of people, from people around this district, just what they went through, what they've experienced. And I bring that, and I use that to grow each and every day. There's a lot of work to do, and fundamentally, we got to come together to get people back to work. And I think our vision does that.
Thank you. Mr. Shinagawa.
Thank you very much. Well, yes, we've spent a lot of time across this very large congressional district. And I actually started this whole journey back in March. What happened is that after redistricting happened, I thought about running. And I didn't go to Tompkins County first for that. I actually went to places like Owego and to Tioga, other communities in Tioga County like Waverly. And I talked to the mayor of Waverly there. His name's Kyle McDuffie. And I had worked with him during the floods, the devastating floods of Tropical Storm Lee just 1 year ago. And during those floods, I was the incident commander of Robert Packard Hospital. I managed all of our operations for 3 days. And in the aftermath, I actually helped those communities rebuild. Unfortunately, the congressman at that time wanted to play partisan politics and said that he wouldn't support more FEMA funding unless there was an offset somewhere else in the federal budget. Well, I saw the effect of that decision and what it did to communities here in the Southern Tier. And so I talked to Kyle McDuffie and I said, will you give me your support? And he said, Nate, I don't know you much as a politician, but I know you as the guy that I've worked with at Guthrie and also as a mayor here in Waverly after your help in the floods, so I'll support you. And from there, we actually ended up getting the support of every mayor across the Southern Tier of all the large cities in this district. Now, in the process of campaigning, I've taken myself everywhere. I've talked to the Shooters Committee on Political Education. Actually, we were at a pig roast together at the Shooters Committee on Political Education. And also, I've taken my journeys to places like the Cattaraugus County Fish and Game Club. And I went to the Cattaraugus County Fish and Game Club, and I can tell you, not a lot of Democrats at the Fish and Game Club there. And but I still went anyway. It was a 4-H trap shooting event. I went and shot trap with a few members of the club, and I got 17 out of 25. And but it was amazing. That's a pretty
good shot. I give you
thank
credit for that. That's pretty good. So I can pat you on the back.
Yeah. And what was amazing is that I talked to these Fish and Game Club members, and they said, Nate, now that we've warmed up to you, and you're a pretty good shot, we are DOT workers, and we're concerned about what? We're concerned about jobs. How do we turn around this economy? How do we get manufacturing jobs in this area? How do I keep my young people here? What about the future of my pension? What about Medicare and Social Security? And I said, well, Congressman Reed, he has voted for things like the Ryan budget, which would, in the first instance, privatize Social Security, which would have been devastating in 2008. Where he actually he's voted for a voucher system for Medicare, which would increase out-of-pocket expenses for seniors by $6,000 a year. And by the way, $6,000 is a lot when the average senior is living off just $22,000 a year. And I said that in terms of jobs, the congressman in the Ryan budget has voted for incentives that actually say that if a corporation builds a factory in, say, Mexico, they can pay the tax rate of Mexico rather than that of the United States. It incentivizes these jobs going away. I say that we need to fight to keep our jobs here, to bring them back home. We've got to fight for the middle class and rebuild it from the middle. Rebuild this economy from the middle across. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I find it ironic that when you're talking to the shooters at the Fish and Game Club, that what you offered them is, well, let me tell you how bad Congressman Reed is. Come on, that's not productive. You should be talking about how are we going to grow this economy? Where are we going to make these infrastructure? If they're road workers, where are we going to make up that differential from the gasoline tax that's only producing $37 billion of revenue to try to cover a $100 billion infrastructure problem in America? Where are we going to come up with creative new revenue lines to do that? Where are we going to take care of those revenue shortages?
Very quickly, one sentence.
We are really running out of time, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So I want to have time to ask the last question.
Sure.
And then give you a few-minute closing. The last question comes from Hobart Senior Will Holstrom. And he asks, what is one issue on which you would break with your party and why? And we'll start with you, Mr. Shinagawa.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, it was funny that we were talking about the Shooters Committee on Political Education because we do have a lot of very responsible gun users and gun owners in our district. And so I have consistently said that I believe we have gun laws, that we should enforce them, but we don't need any new ones. And that is something that has actually caused people to be very upset with me, in even the Democratic Party. but it's something that I believe in and that I believe also fits with the rest of my district. Now, if you actually look across my record as a county legislator, I mean, there have been many times where I've actually taken on the party leadership. I mean, in fact, there was a healthcare issue back in 2006 when Governor Spitzer was running for office. And if you all remember, he had 70% of the vote, all right? He was going to sail in. And I said, well, now that you have this support, it's time for you to take a stronger stance on healthcare. You know, let's try to find ways to get the profits out and actually get the care, get healthcare focused on patients rather than the profits. And I wanted to organize a rally outside of one of his debates to push him on that issue. And Governor Spitzer's staff told me that if I did this, that I would never work in New York State politics again. Well, I'm still in New York State politics.
Spitzer sure isn't.
Exactly. And that's the attitude, is that I have taken this approach that even when I have to take on my party leadership, I'll do what's right. And I think that type of leadership is what we need in Washington. Someone that will say, even to their own party, that we need to find ways to get things done, to turn around this economy. And there may be things that I don't agree with you on, but I'm going to keep on fighting. And because, most importantly, I'm fighting for you, for my constituents, for the people of this district.
Thank you. Congressman Reed?
Well, see, again, Nate, there you go. You use your position on gun rights, and you articulate what your position is. But then, just recently, you voted against rifle hunting in Tompkins County as a county legislator. That's an additional law that you are advocating for to limit that constitutional right set forth in the Second Amendment. So let's just be consistent. Let's just tell people how you feel. Where do we differ? I'll tell you. Where we differ is we are strong advocates of the STEM programs. That's the science, technology, engineering, mathematics programs, and education. I believe that is a critical piece to our future. Our party doesn't seem to want to embrace it as much, and I firmly believe that we need to embrace it wholeheartedly, because as I talk to small business owners and manufacturers in particular at those fab shops, those machine shops, they're losing that skill set that is going to allow us to have that manufacturing renaissance and rebirth in America again. And they need the science, those engineers, that mathematic base in order to have a workforce that they can tap into to put people back to work. Also, Cooper La Tourette is probably the example where we broke. There was 38 of us that put our name up on the wall. And I'll tell you, Cooper La Tourette, have you read, I don't know if you read it, but everything you say about it is just not true. And I'll tell you, when we passed Cooper La Tourette, there were a lot of people, because essentially Cooper La Tourette is Simpson-Bowles. It's the president's own joint debt fiscal reduction commission put into a budgetary format, essentially. And when we were going through that process during that budget debate, I had a few hundred members of the House say, we're with you. I'm so glad we're stepping up. I'm so glad we're trying to move the needle to really try to bring the groups together. At least we can have a starting point in the House that we can bring to the Senate, and hopefully the Senate will pass a budget they haven't passed in 4 years. And then we can have a true dialogue and debate between the two chambers and then come up with something to solve these problems. And I'll tell you, it was kind of frustrating. No, it wasn't kind of. It was frustrating. Because when the clock ticked down, because you get 5 minutes to vote essentially on these votes, clock is ticking down. All of a sudden, all the rats started to leave the ship. And 38 of us stayed firm. And we did that because we wanted to send a message. If there's any serious person in Washington, D.C. that wants to deal with the serious problem of our national debt crisis, our jobs crisis, our fiscal crisis, our currency crisis that is potentially coming down the pipeline in the next 12 to 24 months, I'm all ears. And let's have a conversation, and let's make the hard decisions. Now, I can tell you, there were a lot of folks in our party that looked at me and said, what are you doing? And I said, look, it's time. It's time. Enough is enough. We need to move the needle and move to solutions for Americans.
Now,
Thank you very much. We just have time for closing statements, and I'm going to start with Congressman Reed, and you each have 2-minute closer.
Actually, I think according to the coin flip, it was the other way around.
Oh,
okay.
sorry.
All right.
That's okay. See, I will give you an A.
Well, it's an honor to be here with all of you today. And, I think that what you're hearing today are two very different visions for America. The congressman supports budgets like Cooper-LaTourette that have huge amounts of cuts to Medicare, which ends our guarantee for Medicare. He's also then voted twice for the Ryan budget that does that as well. He's voted for jobs to be shipped overseas. He's voted even to double student loan rates and reduce Pell Grants for 9 million students here in the country. That is not the America that I believe in. I believe that he's voted for a very anti-middle class agenda. What I would like to see us is do the following. Work on jobs. When it comes to jobs, we have to end these deductions that corporations can get overseas for going overseas. That's something that the Democrats tried to do and Congressman Reed voted against, right? But we need to end those deductions. We need to bring incentives to bring jobs home. We've got to look at our trade agreements and say, these free trade agreements aren't helping us. We need fair trade agreements so Americans are playing on a level playing field, because when we play on a level playing field, we win. What we need to do is also invest in new technology. And we can actually invest in that and actually make it happen here, because we already are at places like Corning Incorporated and Cornell University, where we've actually invested in the renewable energy technologies of the future. We should not only research and develop it here, we should build it here. And I believe in incentives that will actually make that happen. When it comes to security, we absolutely need to make sure that the Medicare guarantee is there for our seniors, that we're not going to tinker with it, as the congressman has proposed to do on multiple occasions, but what we will actually do is protect the Medicare program, protect Social Security for the long run. We've got to deal with our spending problem in Washington, no doubt. And that's why I believe that when it comes to things like the military budget, for example, we need to get out of Afghanistan. We have to ask for accountability in the Pentagon budget. What we actually have to say is that there are bases overseas that we don't need anymore, that are remnants of the Cold War. And we can close those bases down and save us billions of dollars. There are other proposals like that that we need to put on the table. And finally, we need to actually ask the wealthiest Americans in this country to pay their fair share in taxes. Because if we do, I'm sorry, and if we do, we can invest in education and infrastructure and actually have the money to pay down our debt and deficit and turn around this economy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Congressman Reed.
Well, thank you, Nate, for the opportunity to have this conversation with you tonight. Thank you to our host and to our timekeepers. Great job. And thank you to my family for being here tonight. I think you heard tonight two different versions and visions of where we need to go for the future of America. I firmly believe in the private sector. Now, there's been an attempt tonight to try to label us as somebody who doesn't stand with the middle class. Well, let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the youngest of 12 kids. My father died when I was 2. I met my mother raised 6 of us that were left on a military death benefit check and a Social Security check. We didn't have any silver spoons around our breakfast table. And what we did is we followed the advice of my mother and my father in making sure that we all got an education. I got the law degree. I have a sister who got a cosmetology degree, and we got degrees all the way in between. And I'll tell you, that is something that is critical. Education, I think we wholeheartedly agree. Education is the key to success moving forward. And what I'll say is, in order to strengthen America for generations, we can no longer have these government-driven policies out of Washington, D.C. What we need is a strong and vibrant private sector-based economy again, where individuals are not guaranteed success by government, but simply that government provides the opportunity for everyone to succeed on his or her own merit. Now, I'll tell you, it's a populist statement to say that the rich need to pay their fair share and we got to tax more. President Obama, top 2%, that's $70 billion of additional revenue that we're talking about. You got a $1.1 trillion deficit every year. So if we're going to be honest about the situation, one thing that we would say is that we got to look at this problem long term, and we got to look at it by getting together and coming up with solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both very much, gentlemen, for coming. Thank you, audience, for being respectful, and have a nice evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You want to take some pictures with them? Sure. Okay, so what